Make sure you do your bingo. It comes in handy at the diversity reception. We want to make sure that our panelists stay back after the session for a group photo. And now we're going to turn it over to them to lead this morning's conversation. Please welcome Mike Anani, an associate professor of communication and journalism at USC's Annenberg School, as well as our fabulous panelists. Give it up for them. Come on.
Oh my goodness. Following that energy is really hard, so thank you very much. This is fantastic. This is my first time at this conference, and it's a total treat to be here, and it's a total treat to get to be part of this panel and to share this conversation with three amazing people. At the outset, I just wanted to say, Nick Watt from CNN was supposed to join us, but unfortunately had a breaking news moment. We had a car conversation this morning, and he really wanted to be here, but duty called, and he had to cover. So he's here in spirit. The other person that I wanted to just give a shout out to and thank is Jen Christensen from CNN, who really is responsible for convening us, bringing us all together, assembling this wonderful set of people. Yeah, please. And I'm hoping Jen is also stuck in a work obligation right now, but I think is going to join us shortly, so she's also very much here in spirit. So thanks very much to Jen and to Nick. So yeah, as I mentioned, so brief little sense, I'm Mike. I'm a professor at USC Annenberg. I've been sort of researching and studying and thinking about the role of AI in journalism for several years now, and sort of bigger questions about how technology either appears in journalism or shapes journalism. So it's a real treat to both get to talk about this topic in this session with you all, with these three amazing people, and to also have an open conversation, which we'll shift to toward the end of the session. So get your questions, your comments, your thoughts, your fears, your hopes, all those things sort of top of mind, and we will get to them for sure. But without further ado, I want to introduce the amazing panelists that we have and kick off the conversation. Many of you probably already know these people very well, so I'll give some tight and short bios. Directly to my right, Gina Chua is executive editor at Semaphore, a new global news startup. Yes. Joined Semaphore in May 2022, part of the founding team. Before Semaphore was executive editor at Reuters, overseeing newsroom operations, logistics, budget, safety, security, pretty much all the bits of a newsroom. And also co-founded the Sigma Data Journalism Awards and was the inaugural recipient of the ONA's, Online News Association's, Impact Award for dedication to innovation. So welcome, Gina. We're thrilled to have you here. Ina Fried. Gina, but without a G. We were having pronunciation conversations earlier. Ina is the chief technology correspondent at Axios and lead author of the daily Axios AI Plus newsletter. Before Axios, she was senior editor at Recode, covering mobile and producing the Code Mobile Conferences series. Before Recode, covered mobile for all things digital and spent a decade at CNET, and in 2016 was inducted into the NLGJA LGBTQ+ Journalists Hall of Fame. So welcome, great to have you here, Ina. Thank you. And Cece Wei, on the very end, is Chief Impact Officer at Cal Matters and The Markup, a new, and we're talking about that, a new merger, a new collaboration, creating new ways for journalism to restore readers' sense of agency, serve communities, and drive real-world impact. And before that was editor-in-chief of the Markup, co-executive director of Open News, and assistant managing editor at ProPublica. And in 2024, won the Freedom of the Press Rising Star Award, and in 2021, the International Women's Media Foundation Award awarded her the Gwen Ifill Award. Fantastic. So welcome, Cece. So this is a powerhouse crew. We have no shortage of expertise and experience and perspectives on this stage, so I'm totally thrilled. Here's what I wanted to do, though, to kick things off and to start. This topic, this word AI, this turn in the last few months or years of generative AI, I'm just kind of curious, and no shame, this is a totally safe question, no problem at all, but I'm just kind of curious, show of hands, to get a sense of where we're at in this room and where this conversation is right now. And if you don't want to participate, no problem. Show of hands, though, who would feel comfortable explaining generative AI to like an 8-year-old right now? Love it. Love it. Okay, yeah, panelists. Okay, great, this will give a sense. Who here has sort of like played with generative AI tools or AI tools in, say, the last month, and you sort of see it as part of your regular work or part of your go-to workflow? Awesome, okay, cool. Last question I want to ask. Who sort of is confident or you know how your organization or your colleagues are using AI? Is something you talk about, something you know about, or is it a little bit like under the radar? Okay, cool, awesome. This is good. This is great. This gives us a really good basis to go from. Okay. So in that spirit, what I'd love to do to kick things off is kind of get some definitions on the table, because we've got this almost word salad of data journalism, computer-aided reporting, computational journalism, predictive AI, generative AI, all these things that are sort of terms that are swirling around that are often invoked in ways often without precision. So I want to ask our panelists, first of all, and I think Cece had first raised this question, so I'm going to look at you a little bit. This definitional question in our pre-conversation. What the heck do you mean by AI? What is this thing? How do you define it for yourself in your work? What are your vibes about that term, that word?
Yeah, what are my vibes? That's a great way of framing that question, actually. So, well, one observation real quick is that I love that there are more people in this room who use it like kind of as a part of their everyday routine than the number of people who feel comfortable explaining what generative AI is to an 8-year-old. I actually love that because it means you're playing around with it even if you don't fully understand it, which I think is just like how we learn stuff anyway. So I think that's fantastic. I have a spicy way of describing my vibes. So I have liked to say that artificial intelligence is neither artificial nor intelligent. So the most popular part of AI in terms of like what has taken over our attention is generative AI specifically. And I actually literally just thought of this sitting in that table. What I love to just make sure we're all on the same page on, because I think there's a lot of overhyping about how sort of sentient or thinking generative AI is doing when it's doing none of that. And instead, it's just doing a lot of statistics and math. And I was like, how do I explain this? And the actual, I think, great metaphor for this is if you watch Family Feud or have ever watched it, and they're like, we polled 100 people, right? And you're supposed to guess what are the most likely answers. That is what generative AI is doing, except for at like a massive scale, right? Generative AI is like, I polled the entire internet about the sentences that they use. And as a result, here's what I would actually add as the next sentence based on what you're asking me. So that's how I would think about it. It is like nowhere near the sphere of even beginning to be qualified as like sentient or thinking in any kind of way.
Love it. Ina, Gina.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and that's my new, I'm going to steal that as my new answer. I mean, what I've also heard a lot, and I think probably many of you have, is the idea that it's autocomplete on steroids. And that's from the people that developed it. The reason I bring that up is I think it's really important as we have the rest of the conversation to remember, if you wouldn't trust autocomplete to write your story, you probably shouldn't trust generative AI to write your story. It doesn't mean it can't be useful. I love autocomplete. It wasn't great when it changed CC to sushi a minute ago. I thought it was rather racist. But it is useful.
True story.
True story. But I wouldn't trust it to do on its own much of anything. And I think it's super powerful. It's incredible what autocomplete on steroids looks like. It can create whole essays, it can translate, and there are some things that we'll get into that it's really good at. But we should have in the back of our mind, to Cece's point, it's no more intelligent than autocomplete or the people that answer Family Feud questions.
Gina, can I reflect on that and tell us what you think, but also as a perspective of somebody who has built a lot of systems. You've built a lot of systems in newsrooms, and you've done it. Where do you see this definitional?
So I agree 100%. But so understanding the underlying systems is both sort of interesting and humbling. I come at a slightly different perspective. I think even as I agree with all this, I tend to think of AI systems or machine systems as sort of capabilities, right? And there's capabilities to do pattern recognition, there's capabilities to do math, there's capabilities to do translation, and so on. And this latest one, generative AI, has two really interesting capabilities. One is image and video generation, which is at a level that is sort of fairly unprecedented, I think. And the other one is just to remember that an LLM is a large language model. It handles language. And one of the reasons that I think we get tripped up is we keep thinking it's human, we keep thinking it does things, and it's not a large fact model, it's a large language model. And one of the things I just keep telling everybody, I have a slightly different analogy. So I think of LLMs, the language part of it, as basically a really smart, slightly autistic English major. His name is Dylan. He wears a beret. He's got a cigarette. So I have a picture. I have an AI-generated picture of Dylan. It's very useful. Dylan is a nice guy. Dylan wants to help you, but Dylan is kind of stupid. But Dylan's an English major, so Dylan can read. And so if you ask Dylan, when did Benjamin Franklin die, he'll give you an answer, but he's going to kind of guess because he slept through history class. But if you give him a book about Benjamin or about the Founding Fathers and you ask him to read it, he will pull the answer outright because they have the ability to churn through text. If you ask him when George Washington died, he'll give you that answer too. If you ask him how many years apart they died, he can't do that because he can't do math because he's an English major. And it's important.
Which I'm sure many of us in the room can relate to.
I'm a math major, just get one out of the way. But anyway, the point is just if you understand the capabilities and their limitations, they are very, very powerful. The trick is when you lose track of that, and so a lot of I think a lot of the use cases really have to build around what do we know it can do, what is our confidence, what's the error rate on that, and can we live with that error rate, and what do we do to mitigate that error rate?
Yeah.
And I think as we get into this, and we'll get into it, that doesn't mean it's not very useful for certain tasks. It's just important to remember both what it can and can't do, but that's transient. It's going to be able to do things a year from now that it can't do now. But I think as journalists, we can't lose sight of the way it works, because the way it works is fundamentally not compatible with news gathering, with fact scrutiny, with some of the things that are really important to our profession. Again, it doesn't mean it can't be of great use to us, but we have to remember the role that we play. And newsrooms that are deciding how they're going to use AI need to really be thoughtful around what they do and don't let AI do. And in particular, one of the scariest things, I cover AI as my day job, is some of the things that they're looking to do is give these AI bots that have all the characteristics we've just spoken about agency and letting them make decisions. And I would no more, just as I wouldn't let AI write the news story for me, I wouldn't let AI make other important decisions without human oversight. And that's, unfortunately, I think, the next step of where the industry wants to take us.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. And I am still a little stuck on the idea of Dylan the bot and as the English major. And maybe that's swag for next year.
He'll be at the reception later.
Yeah.
You two can hang out.
Like maybe a bobblehead. We could have a Dylan bobblehead next year. Okay, yeah, that would be great. Well, to that point I really want to get concrete now, like thinking about these use cases, thinking about these limits, thinking about these sort of opportunities for AI and how there are some, I call them sort of boundaries or bumpers on it. And as I talk to people, everybody kind of seems to have different perspectives on, I would definitely use it to do that. No, that's a no-go. That's an area that I wouldn't do. So I'd love to, let's get concrete let's get talking about specific examples, places where you've seen, and let's be a little wobbly on AI versus generative AI a little bit, but thinking about the sort of broader space of this computational landscape that we're talking about. Where have you seen these examples pop up, either in your own work, things you've built, things you've covered, things you've deployed? Where do you see this popping up, and where do you see that promise, that hope, that energy, but also where are your personal bumpers, or where are your personal no-go zones for how it is? Cece, I'm gonna ask you.
Yeah, I'm
kick us
happy
off.
to start. So
Yeah.
I'll start off with probably like one of the most exciting uses that our newsrooms are using it for currently. So I had nothing to do with the creation of what I'm about to say. It's not mine. But Cal Matters, as I have dug further and further into it, because our companies are now one, I've been working a lot on this project called Digital Democracy. What it is, if you haven't heard of it, is that the California state legislature meets for a certain amount of time every year, right? And then there are certain months that they're off. It's a very common sort of state legislature situation. What digital democracy does is that there's a version for the public where it doesn't use AI at all. The public version allows you to look up basically everything your representative might have said, or how they voted on every single bill that session, literally the video of their hearings and things like that, so that you can really just like see everything that happened without needing to have watched a feed, and you can search through it. So that's really helpful. But on the back end, what we are using AI to do is to basically ingest all of that information that we're showing publicly in real time every day, and then generating a bunch of story ideas for reporters to review to see if they're any good. And the reason why it is incredibly powerful is because I could never consume that kind of information daily, process it well. I would probably fall asleep at some point because of how much information there was. And what we have essentially fine-tuned the AI to do, and we fine-tune it constantly, is to pull out what is an anomaly. Like, what's something that happened, but knowing what happened in the last, 300 days of this period, it's really weird, right? And, weird can mean it's never happened before, or it happened a ton, or, really very rare words were used for some reason, or there was, something where people just said words that it couldn't understand, right? It could mean anything, and we're constantly giving the AI feedback on, this is not interesting, so you don't need to flag things like this, and here's why. And I feel like it has generated some of probably the most impactful stories that we wrote this year, because it noticed something that human reporters, Cal Matters has a newsroom full of reporters who know the Capitol very well, right? But one of the stories earlier this year that it was able to pull out is that actually a lot of bills are not being passed, not because legislators are voting no. It's because so many of them are choosing not to vote at all, and therefore it doesn't pass, right? And it happens so frequently, but no one has written about it. And then once we looked at it, it was bills that mattered incredibly a lot to people. And I won't go into those specifics. The one thing, though, that I knew that mattered is because state legislators have told our editors sort of in passing, now we actually have to pay attention to when we abstain, because now people are actually watching that action, and we can't use it to just say, oh, we didn't vote down this bill, right? Yeah.
Right. Can I just jump in and say, so what I'm hearing in that is sort of this engagement with patterns. Patterns. What patterns are there, what patterns are not there, and that judgment of patterns. Sorry, Ian.
I was going to say two things, and that was one of them. Pattern recognition, taking massive amounts of data. Data journalism has always been constrained by the fact time. Reporters just don't have that much time. You have to choose and prioritize projects. I do believe generative AI will allow newsrooms that take advantage of it to do more data journalism, because the bots can do a lot of the work. And the important part is the way that CC's newsroom has structured it, which is let the AI do what it's good at, which is spotting a whole bunch of anomalies, a whole bunch of interesting things, flag it for smart subject matter experts, and let them say, well, this is just because, vibes wasn't a word 5 years ago.
Right.
All the stuff that my 11-year-old is saying didn't exist. That we can ignore, but this is the interesting pattern. But the second thing that I think is super important, and I hope everyone takes away, is making sure you're not asking the AI to do something it's not good at, making sure that the humans are involved at the right spot. I think that's key. So for me, we're looking to those things. I don't know at Axios that we've yet picked the projects, but there are other things it's really good at. So I'm using Otter right now. How many people use Otter? So a lot of you, which is great. It started out just as a great transcribing tool. Now what I can also do is I can ask questions of my notes. And I can actually ask questions not just of one recording like this, but I can say, when did this come up? And that, to me, is where I have great hope, especially as I get older and my memory is shorter, of being able to pull from every interview I do. I used to never tape interviews because I never had time to go back and it wasn't structured. Now I tape almost every interview because I know I'll be able to search for it later. And so I think the key to me is, what is it good at today? Keeping in mind, I try not to judge, it'll never be good at X. Because I am impressed. I've been covering Silicon Valley for 25 years. I've never seen a technology advance as quickly as this technology. At the same time, I do imagine it's going to continue to have some of these key limitations. And I think, in general, what we've seen other industries do is ask it to do too large of a task. And that's where a lot of the things stumble. Whereas if you ask it to do a very narrow thing that it's good at, it really can save us a lot of time. We've seen fantastic, in the absolute sense, fantastically awful examples of when you give it too much to do. All the newsrooms that are asking it to write a story about anything other than a sports score or an earthquake are finding that's not a task it's good for. And I don't imagine it's going to be a task that it's good for anytime soon.
People probably saw ESPN's announcement yesterday about using generative AI for game recaps. So.
And they're terrible. No offense to my ESPN colleagues.
I was going to say, we may have some people in the room who are
it
part
will
of that,
add adjectives. All it has is the same information that you or I would get from reading a box score, and it just adds a bunch of adjectives.
So
Shade.
I don't use Otter to record interviews because I don't interview, but it does record all my therapy sessions, which is really useful. God, I'm very fucking.
Poor Otter.
There's a whole thing
that
about
Dylan? Is
cruelty
Dylan
to
there?
AI, and like this one definitely. So I'll riff in a slightly different direction. So I mean, a lot of what I'm trying to do is try to chain different capabilities, right? LLMs are good at some things. So at Reuters, I built a tool that basically takes financial data, because Reuters does a lot of financial stories, and does pattern recognition exactly the same way. This is the highest this stock has been in 3 years. This is the, whatever, the 20-day moving average. And back in those days, we had to use templates because we didn't have language generation. And so they just template out a bunch of sentences. They would drop it into reporters, or they would drop it into stories, because a reporter could say, like, hey, just tell me how the stock did. Press the button, and it would say, closed up, and then it would be like the 10th time, and you can edit it and so on. So those are tools. At Semaphore, we're using it like in a 30-person newsroom. So we don't build a lot of tools. We're using it for fairly simple things: proofreading, stories, copy editing. It's actually really good. But the main thing I've been doing, I'll come back to Dylan because we all love Dylan, is talk about mostly I'm focused less, and this is less with my Semaphore hat on, and more with my whatever it is, doing other stuff hat on, is to think about how it will change the way people come to information, and how the industry is going to change or have to change in response. And so when I go back and I say, Dylan doesn't know when Benjamin Franklin died, but if you give him a book, does. And that is a system called a RAG. It's a bad name, I know. But it's called a RAG, which is a retrieval augmented generation system. And you can build RAGs. Takes 5 minutes. I build them on my weekends. So I built a whole bunch of RAGs with 3 basic use cases. One use case is essentially put some document in and ask questions. It's very accurate. I put the Trans Journalists Association style guide in there, and you type in, say, how do I refer to a shooter that police say is trans? Blah, comes back out. It's 90-something% accurate, and probably more accurate than asking someone to read our style guide. It's a lovely style guide. Read our style guide and actually figure out the answer. So that's one thing. It can categorize information very well. I put in the DOJ definition of a hate crime, which is about that long. It's a paragraph, sorry, it's not a book. It's that many words. And I put in made-up stories, and I say, does this sound, on a scale of 1 to 5, does this look like a hate crime? And it's a very fast way of categorizing information. I've also built, just for all the people who cover trans stuff, I built a trans misinformation and misclassifier bot. I put in every story that I don't like in there. Well, I put in all the ones I like too, and it comes back with a misinformation score, 1 to 5, and a misframing score, 1 to 5, and explains why it gave it that score. It's, again, pretty accurate. I have to keep tweaking it as terms change and so on, but it works. And then the most interesting thing I've done is I've taken a bunch of scoops that we've had at Semaphore, and I've put them in a RAG, and I've asked it to answer questions about these 5 stories. I started off saying, tell somebody at a bar, but that was a little bit racy, so I said, tell somebody at a business lunch. It's very, very accurate. I'll give you some examples of that if you want, but critically, it allows you to not have to read an 8,000-word story. It's summarization on steroids, but it's summarization in an ask and answer way. So like, I know this already, why do I need to know that, right? When I ran the Asian Wall Street Journal, which was the Asian edition of the Wall Street Journal, you'd have US journal people come out and they'd write stories like Singapore, comma, a country the size of Rhode Island. And I'd go like, okay, I have to edit that out for my audience because like, I think we know how big Singapore is. If in fact you had said Rhode Island, comma, a state the size of Singapore, that might have been more useful to my readers. The point is that you can't do this at scale, right? I mean, sort of jokes apart, you can't do this at scale. But you can do it at scale with LLMs. And that changes the nature of how we can reach audiences and what people know, what they don't already know. Have you read the last 5 stories on this issue? And can I just tell you what's new? Or are you coming in and catching up and you need all 8,000 words? Or what do you need in between? And I think that as we think about product and how news is going to evolve, a language handling bot, Dylan, being very helpful, may be able to transform some of what we do and really kind of give us a moment of reset to think about what it is we do and how we do it and who we do it for.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to add one thing to this because all of the examples made me think back to, going back to steroids, right? It's like Dylan got some really great language steroids or something. Because if you think about the examples of like earthquakes and sports scores, 15 years ago, journalists were already building tools to write stories about earthquakes and sports scores because you can template it out, right? As a human being, you just know the basic version of the story. I don't need to know anything other than the numbers to be able to give anybody instructions to be able to write the rest of it if I just tell them if this, then that. The difference now is that it takes so much less time to build something like that, right? Like when I was in school at Northwestern, there was a whole project in the computer science department with journalism that was doing this over the course of years. And now, if you are able to use AI as your foundation, you can build that so much faster. And so it's more like, if you think about all of the things in your life, either personally or as a journalist, that you feel like, it's complicated, but I can give someone instructions and not actually have to talk to them to get them to understand my instructions. You now don't need to know how to code, and you can sort of use this technology to really start to automate that at scale.
Well, let me add one other thing too, just really quickly, which is, oftentimes we look at a story that's written by a machine, and they're getting better, and they say, "Oh my God, that's a terrible story." That is equivalent to saying, "I think my dog plays checkers," and you go like, "Wow," and you say, "No, I beat it 3 times out of 5." No, your dog plays checkers, right? I mean, so that's the key thing here, and so. Just think about, Little League games, never get covered, right? And so it's a shitty story, but it's a story. How many murders do you think there are in DC a year?
Murders?
Yeah, well, homicides.
Homicides, 300, 400.
Oh, 276. I checked yesterday. Used to be 150. How many of them do you think the Washington Post covers? Okay, we can guess, right? Whatever that number is, it's not 270 something. There was a great site at one point, Homicide Watch DC, that covered every murder in DC. Did they? I thought they covered them actually pretty well. That's a service. That is a underserved community of families of victims. Homicide Watch DC, sadly, is out of business. But what could we do with AI systems to serve those audiences? How can we rethink our mission? How can we rethink who we are serving and how we can serve them, albeit with not Pulitzer Prize winning stories, but there's stuff people want and they need, and we can do it.
Can I don't, you know, if you're going to jump in, but can I just put something on the table that I'm sort of hearing that I want to reflect back, and that's, you know, whether it's what's happening in the legislature or you know, earthquakes or sports stories, what I'm sort of hearing is maybe a differentiation of beats, and maybe there's a different way to be thinking about what the heck a beat is anymore. Because if there's a capability of telling stories in beats that we think of as perhaps, you know, more mundane, or like we've just got the sports stories and I can just give you a quick rundown, or the earthquake happened and it was, I mean, my colleagues at LA Times and QuakeBot have done some amazing work of like, you know, Mad Lib style telling the story of the earthquake and what happened. But I get what I'm sort of hearing is, do you think that there's more to those beats than meets the eye? And maybe that's what AI is potentially pushing us to do, is to reconsider things that we had thought of previously as a little rote, a little automated.
Well, and I want to expand one level further, which I think is where we're going, which is it's not just for our benefit as journalists that we need to start asking these questions. If the bots can do it perfectly well, journalism is not going to make money doing it. So I think an under-discussed part of this is, what is AI going to do to journalism broadly? Not just how are we going to use these tools, but as an industry, particularly on the business side, we've done such a bad job of recognizing where technology is going, to our industry's tremendous detriment, and because we all believe in journalism, to society's detriment. We can't afford to get this wrong. Social media and the internet have taken enough revenue out of our industry. We can't afford to let AI take another huge swath, and it's positioned to do it, not because it can report, but it's just, and this point has come up, it's a tremendous summarizer, it's a tremendous aggregator. We have to recognize that. We have to know that's going to happen and figure out what can we do. And to be honest, it's not have it write 3 more sports stories, because somebody who's not in journalism, for them, that's incremental revenue. And there's going to be just a wave of really useful aggregators that are built. How are we as an industry going to see what AI is doing, tell that story? Great, that keeps me employed. But what would keep my colleagues employed is figuring out, how do we have a business in a world where these tools can do what they do? And I think that it's not, you know, that's a plenary-worthy topic on its own. But it gets to the point of, what are the tools good at? What can we do with them? Again, I'd be less interested in having a bot write about every murder than having the bot analyze every murder and tell me some patterns and some stories that only my newsroom could write about, you know, who is it happening to? How many of these are getting solved? Again, the bigger projects, the things that the robots can't do on their own, but the things that we as journalists can't do on our own either.
So I want to riff off that, and I agree with you. I mean, I think at the first level is it can write about every murder, and then at some point, in fact, the tools are already there. And not generative AI, but certainly just statistical tools, machine learning. It's a whole bunch of things, right? That can do the analysis already, and they can generate a huge chunk of that. Let me just start by saying, one, I do want to stay employed, and I do have a mortgage to pay, but I will say the incredibly unpopular thing, which I say at all these conferences: we are not in the business of saving journalists. We're in the business of saving journalism. And we're not even in the business of saving journalism. We're in the business of saving public interest information in the service of communities. And does that mean that we should exist or not exist is, sort of a whole sort of question of where we should exist, right? I do think that there are things that whether you call them journalists or not, people who are trained, people who have a public service mission at heart, should be involved in this discussion, and not just tech moguls. But I don't get a say in that, right? I mean, that's just kind of the, we can lobby, but we can only do so much. The other line I tend to have is, like, we get the audience that, we go to war with the audience we have, not the audience we would like to have. The audience is going to change. The internet changed things, never mind the business model, and we'll come to that in a second. The internet changed things because it broke the bundle, right? You know, if you had the best sports story there and you had the best politics story there, you didn't have to buy it from one newspaper, you could go to 2 newspapers. And we didn't recognize that. We tried desperately to hang on to the bundle, despite the fact that, in fact, the bundle was already broken by technology. Audiences gave up on the bundle while we tried to hang on to it. What was the correct solution? I don't know, but that was a problem. The second one is social media. Social media changed fundamentally the way you recommended stories, who you got stuff from. And again, we tried to be the recommendation engine, and we failed because the world and the technology was bigger than us. Now, LLMs are going to change fundamentally how information comes to people, how it's customized for people. I have great fears about a whole set of things, but it's going to come. And I don't know that we can sit here and hold the tide back. I think we need to figure out how to adapt to it. We need to get there. And then layered on all on top of that is like how I'm going to pay my mortgage. And that's a different problem, but it's a related problem. Because if I can't pay my mortgage, then I can't play a role in this. But it's going to happen. So we have to figure out not, first of all, how do we pay our mortgage? We have to figure out how do we serve people well, and let's try and figure out how to pay our mortgages after that.
Yeah. Cece, can I ask you to jump in on this point? Because I'm thinking about especially, the recent experience of the merger of Cal Matters and the markup, and, tell me not to ask about that or say as little or as much as you want to, as you can about that. But I'm thinking about, I think what Gina and Ina have put on the table here is this sort of broader question of this landscape of information, technology, social media practices, business interests, economic models. This is the space. And in a way, generative AI is like a piece of it, but it's, so to the extent that we talk about generative AI or AI as this separate technology, not in relation to all these things, are we sort of missing the mistakes that we made of the past, or repeating the mistakes we made of the past of missing social media, missing the internet as a model? So I'm wondering if you could reflect on that in the context perhaps of this merger, but like, what are you choosing to invest in? How are you thinking of, what are you making or not making? And what role do you want that to play in this bigger space?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say, I'm here all day. If anybody wants to talk about the merger, I'm very happy to talk about it. It is going great. And my recent, I promise this is related to answering your question, my recent favorite thing to work on is that, there's an election coming up. But in the world in which there is an election coming up, there's also a bunch of local elections coming up, right? And so how do we get people to pay attention to those important local issues in light of this sort of national stage that is taking twists and turns all the time? And so one of the things we've been working on is focusing on new voters, right? And especially younger voters who are voting for the first time. How do we get them to care about the propositions in California when they may or may not have cared about them at all, period? And so the most fun thing I've been working on recently, and only possible because of this merger, is trying to make propositions go viral on TikTok, right? It has been an incredibly fun endeavor, and we've had some success. But I bring this up because I think there's a very related sense of tying in TikTok specifically as social media, as a way of communication, and generative AI, because both of these tools, let's say, have changed fundamentally how communities actually interact with information. So I use TikTok in my daily life. I made a choice to try it out just so that I could do my job well, and then I got totally converted and obsessed with it. And I will say, I have become, so there was a while where Google search was so dominant, it's what everybody used to access information. And the Google search business model is now under threat because people, instead of using Google, are just using TikTok or YouTube to find videos of other people doing the thing you're looking for, right? And that is fundamentally changing how people are using information. Same thing with generative AI, as it's being incorporated into all of these things, it's sort of instead of reading the individual pieces out there in which you look at who made this, do I know anything about them, you're just getting an answer, right? And both of these things are fundamental to the question that I think Gina was talking about and relates to our business model as well. But the idea of, if our goal is that we are providing really useful information that people need in their daily lives, right? Whether it's across all beats. How do we do that in a world in which people are now interacting with how they get their information in a different way? And I think like I'm not pessimistic about it, because what's kind of interesting to me is that like journalism is experimenting. I think that it needs to experiment a lot faster. But what's kind of interesting is that we are seeing now across the industry, different newsrooms trying different things that break the mold of what we thought counted as journalism 10 years ago or 5 years ago, right? It's sort of like when I think about Outlier Media and their initial SMS outreach to their community, where it's just like, if you don't understand something that you need to understand in your life, just text us. And that led them to some of their most popular stories because, say, nobody in the community knew how to read their water bill, right? And then they made a thing. And what I was most inspired by on the business side is that it was so popular, they got it into libraries. And then local businesses wanted to advertise on the back of it. And so then they came asking to pay them money. Anyway, so I think the idea is that we have to be creative in that sense of like, we can't be married to the way that information is delivered to people is like this, and we are trying to save that mechanism, right? We just have to figure out, okay, like people are always gonna need information. That's not going anywhere. I feel pretty confident in saying that. It's just, people are getting better ways of getting information, right? And you can argue like, you know, better, quote unquote, but it's working for people. And so then how do we actually just work like people need us to work and get people information that way?
And 2 quick points related, and I totally agree. 2 things come out of that. One is what we bring as expertise, and what is most valuable is expertise. And I think it's really important to most of the people in this room are individual journalists who, like Gina, want to pay their rent or mortgage. And what's going to keep those of us that continue to have jobs having jobs is expertise in something. I think one of the things that's really surprising and important to understand about the technology is generative AI makes almost anyone able to rise to the midpoint in whatever profession. If it's used well in any industry, and let's take it out of journalism, it's really good at bringing the lower performers up to the midpoint. Well, what is that good for? It's good for businesses and corporations. It's not great for individuals, but it's particularly not great unless you can show you're really at the top of your game. And that applies as individuals to those of us that want to continue to pay our rent and mortgage, but it also applies to newsrooms. Are you finding down? So at Axios, we're doubling down on the expertise side of the house. The other piece that we haven't talked about that I think is important to bring in at this point is it's also going to lead to a flood of more information, of misinformation, of disinformation. These chatbots are really good at generating convincing sounding bullshit. And that
Dylan is like the most confident English major
yeah.
that ever lived.
All English majors
Dylan
are
always
confident.
has an answer. Dylan never says, I don't know. And in fact, Dylan is great when Dylan knows the answer. But Dylan won't tell you whether they know the answer or not. They don't know. So that's why
As
you
a professor,
get,
I'm having feelings right now.
fake
As a professor.
citations for lawyers. If you say, what was the case that ruled that journalists are entitled to $1 million a year, it won't say, journalists aren't entitled to $1 million a year, the field's declining. It'll say, it was, Dred Scott versus, Pulitzer, and send you a fake URL. The reason I bring that up is, one, to point out the limitation, but also it's going to be a reason why we need journalism more to help. The flood of information has only accelerated. Through my career, the amount of information out there is so much higher. And generative AI basically makes the cost of generating information that sounds good zero. And we were struggling with truth before generative AI. I really think people say, is this the AI election? I think this is the last election before AI fundamentally changes the game.
So 3 unrelated sort of riffs. So one is this point that Ina made about people, jobs, and competition. I was asked it by some college kids at one point. It's like, how does it do for the job? And Ina's absolutely right. So it brings like mediocre people up to, writing anyway, it brings mediocre writers up to the speed of slightly above average writers. It will never help the people right at the top, and well, not never. It currently doesn't help the people right at the top. It doesn't currently help the people right at the bottom. But my God, if you are in that middle space, that is serious competition. Your world has changed dramatically, and you need to recognize that. And one of my theories is that essentially the skill set that is going to be much more highly recognized in journalism is going to be reporting. Reporting and analysis, but reporting far more than it is writing, because writing will get a big assist, right? So if you're a great writer and don't know how to report, you might want to go back to school on that one. That's sort of one part of it. The misinformation flood, I think, is a real issue, and it's going to be. But I'm actually worried about a slightly different issue. I'm worried about targeted, completely accurate information, because now you can write a piece that is missing context. If I know what your biases are, I can get a personalized note to you that convinces you that, or at least helps convince you that this candidate is better, or this bill is better, or whatever. And I don't think we've thought enough about that. That is not susceptible to fact-checking in the traditional sense. So I don't think we spend enough time thinking about that as an existential threat to the flow of information. And that was a third thing, but I can't remember.
It's all good. Well, actually, that relates to something I wanted to bring up. Is there's this word hallucination is bandied about a lot in these contexts, but I think, Gina, what you're pointing to is there's this more subtle sort of interpretive meaning of it. So it's not, as we were talking about earlier, how many R's are in the word strawberry, right? The sort of most recently famous mess up. But it sounds like, is fact-checking even the right frame to be even thinking about this? Because it sounds more like we've got to be much smarter, and to Ina's point about expertise, much smarter about the expertise that exists to say that interpretation does not pass the smell test. It doesn't, and that's a different skill than fact-checking to say, you got the number of R's wrong in strawberry. So what do we do with that mess? And let me just throw one other thing on the table. I'm also conscious that we've sort of been a little bit talking about, organizations, news organizations that are maybe pretty well resourced, or that have some engineering power, some sort of in-house capabilities. And journalism is a big field. Not everybody has those capabilities, has that sort of power organizationally and expertise. So in addition to my sort of my niggle about fact check versus interpretation check, what would you say to newsrooms that are maybe less well resourced, maybe in smaller markets that are sort of a little more on the edge of having to deal with this moment now? Like, it's not a 6-month runway, it's now, it's today. What kinds of things could you offer to help them have those conversations?
I think using the tools that are available to be able to do more work, that is, I think this actually benefits smaller news organizations in many ways more than larger ones that have to figure out how are we going to compete with the whole world of information. If you're in a smaller market, the one thing you have going for you is you are the experts of that market. Again, I think expertise and local knowledge is going to be a big one. And I do think these tools can really help, because you can take every minute of that city council meeting and look for patterns. You can cover it. You can really do, and we've been looking this because Axios Local, we have 2 or 3 reporters, really great reporters, but only 2 or 3 of them in like 30 different cities. So the question is, how can they supercharge what they do? And I do think there's a lot of things in these tools as long as we apply them to the right problems. And so what they're great at is allowing a reporter to take in more information. So I would encourage smaller folks, this is your opportunity. Smaller newsrooms, this is your opportunity to actually get some of the tools that have been privileged to teams that can afford investigative reporters, data journalists. But it's going to be incumbent on you to learn a few things, but you don't have to be a coder. I went to IRE this year, and it was the first time I'd been there, the investigative reporters, and there were so many coders in the room, and I was thinking, wow, I don't understand most of what they're talking about, even though I cover tech, but my sense is you're not going to need all that engineering knowledge that you used to have to write programs for. You're going to be able to say, here's all the data, and ask questions of it. And Google has a tool that I've not used that much, but it can take totally unstructured data, like handwritten forms, and you can ask questions in the aggregate.
Yeah, I mean, so for folks out there, my history is that I came in through journalism and have spent all of my career in data journalism of some kind. And so, like, I have, tried to code ways to read handwriting that was agonizing and took like months and months to get okay, right, at it. And now, like, I don't have to do that anymore. And this runs into a lot of stuff that I experience day to day as well, which is like stuff that I know I could get a workaround on this if I built something for it. But now I actually just go look on the internet for like, is there a tool that'll do this for me in 2 seconds? So I don't have to build anything, right? So that is really helpful. The other thing that's helpful about especially like covering a local area is that there will just inherently be less information available to AI about that area than general topics or extremely like parts of history, let's say, that is commonly taught. With multiple variations, right? It's sort of like the less information in the world there is about something, the less good AI is at giving you confident information about it. So that's one element. I think the other thing that I will say is that what's tied to expertise for me as well, and this is something that I have told students or potential job applicants for every job I have ever hired for across every position I've been in, is that I'm always looking for critical thinking, right? And that goes hand in hand with expertise, right? Like you need some expertise in order to improve your critical thinking and vice versa. But the concept here is that when generative AI hallucinates, right, it is because it is trying to draw conclusions, but it's not actually intelligent, right? So it's just looks like it's trying to draw conclusions because that's how we speak and use language, and then it's not capable of drawing something that's like necessarily logical. And that is exactly where humans come in. And I just want to give one example about something we covered because I think it's a good lesson for journalists as well, however we want to use it, or when we're covering government entities or companies that use it, which is we did this story at the Markup early this year about New York City's chatbot. I don't know if people are familiar with it. Basically, New York City trained like a generative AI bot completely on 100% like New York City written content about running a business in the city. So none of the information, they controlled all of the information that went into training it. All of that information was 100% accurate and up to date. It is literally the entire website that you can still peruse today. And then they told the chatbot essentially to help people essentially be like a website assistant, like you're reading the website for people so they can directly ask you a question. And we ended up doing a story because we were hearing that small business owners were using this and getting weird answers, right? And so we started testing it, very spicy, controversial things. We would ask it like, I own a restaurant, can I take my workers' tips? And it would be like, yes, you can. But the thing that's really interesting about this bot is that the structure of the answers was like, actual fact that is true, actual fact that is true. Therefore, yes, you can take their tips, which a normal human being would read that and be like, how did you get there, right? And so it kind of like, it didn't matter that all the information going in was like 100% accurate and true. This hallucination thing will happen given the progress that generative AI currently has. But at the same time, it's like a human could make that same mistake where if you're not using critical thinking to look at the facts, you're going to get to a conclusion that doesn't make sense. So anyway.
And I want to throw in one.
Can I just interject 1 second? Say, heads up, I'm going to switch to audience questions in a couple minutes. So just audience, have your thoughts in mind. And I think there are going to be mics maybe roaming around. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
Just since we're throwing out some important things, we haven't mentioned the fact that these bots are trained entirely on, they only know what they're trained on, and I think it's incredibly important, especially for this audience, but in general as reporters to do our jobs. They have all the human biases, and they don't look like they do. They don't sound like racists. They don't look like homophobes. You can't tell they're transphobic, but they've been trained on a human history that incorporates all these things. And my worry is today it's actually, relatively speaking, easy to find those biases. Over time, it's going to get better because Dylan's so good at sounding like he's not racist, transphobic, sexist, but everything he knows is built on that history. So one of our important roles as journalists is also to look at what's missing. to question who was writing that history. And in general, it's white, cis, straight men predominantly, and then, you know, each of the underrepresented groups less and less so. Similarly, English dominant, all these things, and these don't have easy answers. So, you know, one of the most prominent things in this image generator is, you know, Google got all this attacks because it was drawing black founding fathers and multiracial Nazis and that sort of thing. Yes, we're right to criticize them, but they were trying, albeit not very effectively, to solve an important problem, which is if you ask a chatbot trained on human history, what does an engineer look like? It's going to say a white dude. If you ask what does a terrorist look like, it's going to paint a picture, literally draw a picture of a dark-skinned, probably Middle Eastern man. That's a real issue that we need to be speaking about more.
And then just one really quick point. You know, going back to small newsroom thing, and the fact that RAGs work actually pretty well when they're a very small amount of data. And the analogy is if you give Dylan 10 books to read, Dylan's fine. If you give Dylan 50,000 books to read, Dylan gets a little confused, as we might. And so, I'm working on a separate project on building journalist safety and security guidance of vetted information. And I've already realized that the corpus of information is too big, and so we have to look at different ways to solve that issue of how to build smaller RAGs out of larger RAGs. There are some technical fixes here, but it's true. If you're going to build a RAG, which I encourage you all to go do, because you can build one in about 20 minutes if you want, to just be aware that once you get past a certain size, I have no idea what that size is right now, but you get past a certain size, it will blow up.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, I want to switch now to, and I think we have
The lovely
help
Bethany is coming around.
Thank you very
looks
much.
like Neil in the back has a question.
And I'll ask you to. So here, so thank you very much for circulating the microphone. What I'll ask question askers to do, please, is keep your questions. First of all, please make them actual questions, not the like I have a speech to make in the form of a question. Keep them tight. That's, yeah. Well, no, actually, and then I'm going to ask our panelists, similarly, please keep your answers tight so we can get as many voices, as many questions on the table as we can. So take it away.
My name is Eddie Reynoso, he, him, his, San Diego LGBT County News. What do you see the role of AI in terms of, from the business side, maybe as an editing software, like editing an AP style, where maybe a columnist or reporter is dropping in their stories into AI?
I mean, so from a business side, I think there's like tons of exciting potential uses for it. Like you could imagine a reporter dropping their story in. I currently ask when I'm working on headlines, ChatGPT to give me a Reddit-style headline first, and it is so good at doing that. And it's a very good brainstorming partner, right? And so you could ask it to write the first draft of your summary copy, your key points, your whatever, but also like look for things that don't make sense. But beyond like journalism writing tools, I will say that from a business side, some of the most exciting uses of AI that I have seen is that it helps journalism fundraise better and do things that like we are not necessarily the industry with that expertise in-house. Like I have seen news organizations use it to say like, okay, these groups give us money. Help me find 50 more groups like those groups that could potentially give me money so I know where to apply for money. And like we have tried using it to write the first draft of annual reports for foundations. And like we can't turn that in, but it is better than me writing the first draft from scratch, right? Because then I just react to it and I make it significantly better. But when it's a blank sheet of paper and I'm like, oh my God, I have to like summarize all my work for a funder. Like that's not the writing that brings me joy. So.
It does great FOIA requests.
Yeah, and I think what you're hearing here is, and I want to just put an exclamation point, is look at what it's good at. So I do think it can help the editor. It can flag things for a human editor. Oh, you might want to check this. I think over time, it'll be really good at knowing where do we go wrong and flagging potential things. I would not want the main line of editing, though, to stop with a bot. because it can't ask the questions in editor. How do you know this? You know, it's not going to be good at that. SEO headline, make sure more people read that journalism, great. Choosing headlines, great. Flagging things for a human editor, great. Being the actual editor, I would say, and I don't see that changing.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question because I'm allowed to hold on to the mic. I work a lot with AI. I work for a state government that will remain nameless that Stephen Colbert once called California's Canada. One of the things I have found is that the AI, and this, I know I'm personifying it, it wants to make me happy. Whatever I ask it, it will confirm it. It could be crap, and it's like, you will be happier if you're right, so I'll tell you you're right. And I try all kinds of strategies to kind of tell it, I want you to give me correct information, not affirming information. And I've had dubious levels of success with that. And I'm just curious, have you all sort of discovered ways to overcome its basic programming to kiss your ass?
I think the fundamental problem is you're asking it to do something it can't do. It is not. I don't know that this is a programmable problem. You're asking it to give you information. It has no sense of what is correct or incorrect. So it will just tell you stuff. I hate to say it. You need to find a different use case. That's not the use case it's good at.
I love disagreeing with Gina, so I'm going to disagree. I think there's a way to do it. You just have to change what you're asking. So you either have to say, here's what I was going to say, what's a good counter-argument, which I do think AI can be a really good sparring partner, or write the question with the opposite intent. So instead of asking it the way you want and it'll kiss your ass, ask it the opposite of what you want and it'll give you the best, again, it can surface a counter-argument, but you have to ask for it. And again, remembering that if it doesn't know, it'll make it up.
I saw a hand way in the back. I saw your hand first. I think the person who still has your hand up, yes. I know there's a lot of questions. I just was randomly trying to see whose hand I saw first, so forgive me. Okay.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I work for NPR in Texas. There was an AI panel yesterday, and we had some discussion on something I want to hear from y'all, which is attribution for AI, how to do that ethically. If we do it for a headline, do we have to say we used AI in some part of this? If we do it for editing, does it need to be disclosed on the website? Who's doing that well? Are there examples? Thank you.
So we have a AI ethics policy that is actually built off of our data ethics policy, and so the overall brush of it is if you are using AI for something, and let's take the most extreme case. You're using AI for something, and the story is literally about AI, right? And so it's you can't miss the fact that this was AI created. Let's say you're trying to demonstrate what images AI can create or something. The way that we think about it is if someone took this out of context and just took that image or whatever and republished it somewhere, is there anything we can do to make sure that people know it's AI? And so we'll label AI generated imagery just straight up on top of the image. Some other news organizations have this policy as well. We're not unique in this way, but it's not enough to just put it in the caption. And then on the total opposite end, I love your headline question, right? It's let's say you ran the nut graph through ChatGPT and you were give me 10 headline options. And you like 3 of them, and then using that, you write your next headline and there's some similarities. Do you have to disclose that to people? So in that case, my personal answer is no, because I'm using it to prompt me to have better ideas. I'm not using it to generate any information at all, and I'm also not using it to sort of publish line by line what they are saying because I find that useful for some reason. If I wanted to publish things that were generated by AI wholesale, so let's say that I was confident enough in the social media copy that it was writing that I just want to publish that. We don't do that, but let's just say I decide to really investigate that one day and see if we can do it. I would probably have something on the profile or related to the messages, similarly to the way that famous people, when they have their assistants write their tweets, they sign it. I'd probably like sign it Dylan, right, or something. It just depends on the extent, like how much of this is me helping me become a better creator of this blurb, copy, etc., and how much of this is me using AI to actually do this job, and then it like goes right to you, readers. Yeah.
So really quickly, I think if it's got a human in the loop, you almost never have to disclose. I think if it did a copy edit and you went and looked up the copy edit, it's like you functionally might as well just write a note. It's like this was copied edit by Fred. He's having a bad day today, and and his wife left him. Like no, you don't say that. You just say like Fred's doing it. If it's wrong, Fred's getting fired. So it's like it's straightforward.
The responsibility element is the key.
Correct.
Yeah.
But there are two times, I think. So one is, so for example, if you use a pure AI-generated translation, or you say, like, hit this button for an AI-generated translation, that's perfectly fine. That you tell people that's what you're getting and no one's checking it, and And then I think if it's doing something particularly complex, even with a human check, which is the kind of nerd box that you do when you say, we use machine learning to figure out which congressmen are, not showing up for, for votes, then yeah, it's like this is the methodology, and it's kind of the same thing.
Other hand, I saw in the orange shirt directly beside. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to do we're not going to get to everybody. I'll do my best, but I'll try. Yes.
I'm Jonathan Handel. I'm an entertainment and technology attorney here in LA and also freelance print journalist. We've been talking about content this morning, but I wanted to ask the panel to address synthetic news anchors that could perhaps be helpful for print folks and threatening for television news folks.
So I have a little tiny bit of experience. So I created, first to review it and then to use AI Ina that I can type in anything and it'll say it in my voice. A couple things. I think it's really important for folks that are in union shops. This is something to put in your next contract in general, to push your newsroom to have a policy that only I own my likeness. It's a really scary world in which my employer has a likeness of me that it can type into. And I know your question was slightly different. It had to do with just creating an avatar that's not a person. But I think one place to start is real people should own their own identities. You should be yourself. Your employer should not be able to use a digital likeness. So what I've said is, yes, I've created this digital version of myself that can say anything. Only I'm allowed to type things into that. You don't own that. So that's one piece. Synthetic anchors, broadcast-friendly avatars, are they going to be better than a trained human? Probably not. Are they better than a print journalist? Depends on the print journalist. I think, again, the principle that probably applies is it's going to lift the lowest level of us, which are print journalists, up to a medium, decent broadcast journalist, but it probably won't make it won't be a better journalist, video journalist than, my hunch is it won't be a better presenter than a good broadcast.
So I don't really have a view on this one, but I will give you an example. I think there's a news organization in Latin America, Christian Publica. I think it's them. They wrote a story, but they wanted it read in different accents and dialects because they wanted to reach a broader group of people. They went out, they licensed a voice from a well-known person, so they didn't cover the IP part of it. And now you've got a story that travels further. So it's partly compared to what, right? Maybe it's not as good as if you had hired that woman who speaks that dialect fluently, but you can't afford to do that. So this is a way of getting more stories to more people. But it's a hell of a legal issue that will keep lawyers employed forever.
And you're going to be able to do, NBC had Al Michaels delivering a daily news recap. It seemed to go well enough that we didn't hear Al Michaels went off script. It does open up the opportunity if you have a broadcast journalist in your market and you have a really important piece you want translated into another language, AI is going to open up the door of having something that looks and sounds like your anchor reading a language that your anchor may not speak. But boy, are there a lot of complications if it gets something wrong. It looks like that anchor is responsible and they're not.
Mm-hmm. I would also, if I can interject or just say briefly, we looked at this a little bit, but I think one of the things to be aware of is thinking about what a dominant dialect is, what a dominant accent is, and I know, especially to our NPR colleague, I know there's some NPR colleagues who've had, get a lot of negative feedback about voices, about pronunciation, about word choices, and there's a line there that I would want to be really careful of not synthetically recreating a lot of the dominant patterns that haven't made room for newer voices and newer types of voices. So sorry to interject, Cece.
So I just want to add one example. It's like related to this that I immediately thought of would be really useful for me, which is, so we do a lot of interviewing sources through a translator, and I can just imagine very easily. So for example, like, I was born in China. I forgot all my Chinese when I came to the US. And then English became my primary language. Then I had to relearn Chinese. And anyway, I'm sure any of you out there who has ever attempted a second language and learned it not as a child know that you are better at certain ways of communicating in that language than others, right? And so for me, it's a lot easier to type Chinese. My brain just works faster to type Chinese than it is to speak Chinese, right? I sound a lot more sophisticated if you are reading my Chinese. And so it would be really helpful if I knew what to say, and then I could have AI actually say it during an interview or something, and actually give me that ability to sort of have the interviewer not get tripped up by the way that I am, my diction or whatever, right? So there's just, yeah.
Great point. I think the next question was here, and then maybe we'll try to go to the back.
Hi, excuse me, Matthew Rodriguez from NBC Chicago. I work in lifestyle and entertainment. I'm kind of piggybacking on the question that was just asked there. I'm in front of the camera. Are there practical uses for like lifestyle content in a positive way that you think an on-air journalist could use AI to benefit my performance or benefit my day? I'm like, looking for ways that I could use it. I don't go through tax forms or, deal with City Hall and those kinds of things. Have you seen examples of that kind of work?
Well, I will say, I don't have an answer for you, but I will say that I'm obsessed with lifestyle AI overall, and so maybe it will give you like story ideas. So for example, I think the beauty industry is doing incredible AI foundation matching for people who can't go in store, right? And like, I have even tried, I don't know if people here know about like color theory and season analysis. I've also tried to use ChatGPT to figure out what my season analysis is based on the hex code of my skin color on different parts of my face, because it was like a trend that was going around to try it that way. Turns out it's not super good because that's only good for overtones and not undertones. But I do think that in that space, it's like some of the most fun applications of AI that makes people's like lives literally easier and better, and it's just fun to do. And so like we don't get to see a lot of that in coverage of it, or like how can we use it in a fun way? Like there's so much possibility there.
I want to know what would Dylan do with that?
Answer
Yeah.
we have had so far.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what Dylan would do with that prompt. Yeah, I think I saw a hand in the very back.
Quietly in his own room.
Right. Is there a way to get a microphone to the person in the very back with a hand up? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I saw your hand up for a while, so I was wanting to get to you. And I'm going to give a heads up. We got a little bit of permission it's okay to go 5 minutes over. Looking at Jen. Yes, okay. Jen has given permission for 5 minutes over because we started 5 minutes late. So yes, take it away.
Hi, Neil Savage. I'm a freelance science writer. On the subject of this being the last non-AI election, I've been a little surprised how few deepfake videos we've seen, but it's coming. Is journalism prepared for this? And are there tools you know of that people can use to check the veracity of a video when they're not doing 6 fingers on a hand or something obvious like that?
So this is a big topic, and I'm just going to throw a few things, and we can talk about this more later. There's a couple things. So one of the technologies that shows the most promise is something called provenance, where hopefully will get built into cameras soon. And they started, Adobe launched this, New York Times is a partner, this content authenticity initiative. So for news reporting, you'll be able to see this is what happened to this video from the moment it was captured. But I think what we need to do is more on the media literacy side as a society of we're not going to be able to trust what we hear and see until that's widespread. And so I think it means more opportunity for journalists and more challenge in that And we've seen this. We've seen it with the robocall in New Hampshire. We've seen isolated incidents of it. But the other piece that I constantly bring up, and we've seen this in this election as well, is the mere existence of the deepfake possibilities allows someone to take something that really happened and say fake news. But I will say all of the issues raised by deepfakes, we've been confronting as a society with cheap fakes. Like our whole last election cycle was based on that's fake news, that's not, before we were at this era. We are really struggling as a society with the idea of truth and not truth, and AI is going to make that worse. We're going to have to get a lot smarter as a society about discerning what happened and didn't. And sometimes we have some tools that we can use. So for example, there was this really easy example where a certain presidential candidate was like, oh, their crowds aren't that big, it's AI. Well, if it was a crowd of people, it turns out those are all human beings that are like, no, I was there was that many people. Where it's going to be harder is when we get that audio that was supposedly came from a private donor thing. It's going to be very hard for us to tell if that audio has been doctored or not.
Great.
I'll just say one last thing. I think it was Singapore that recently decided that even though it hadn't seen a lot of deep fakes around the election come out, that they're just going to ban the use of AI in sort of creating this type of thing for a certain period before the election. And so I think we'll also see sort of more policy responses as well to just try to figure out, like, how do we even tackle this? What can we do? That kind of thing.
As a Singaporean, I hate everything that they might do in terms of... Anyway, forget it. Let's move on. I'll move on.
All right. Mindful of time, I wanted to bring us in for a close by asking our panelists if you had one sort of pithy, concise takeaway. What is the top of mind thing that maybe you're leaving this discussion still, concerned about, still obsessed with, still wondering? What is that thing that is still top of mind for you after this conversation? I'll start CC at the end, maybe.
I'll make it something really practical, which is I think that for us as an industry to figure out how we want to deal with anything, we really have to be very familiar with it ourselves, right? And so I really encourage the half of the room that didn't raise their hands to sort of like playing around with AI to pick something you personally care, like it doesn't have to be related to work, right? You could look for my lips but better shades, right? Like I do using AI. And I just encourage you to play around with it because I have had this experience with TikTok where I didn't use it, I didn't care about it, and then I was like, oh my God, I can't not use it and do my job well. And now it's transformed how I consume information. And we will never be able to like figure out either interesting ways for us to use it, our own ethics policies around it, all of that stuff, unless we are actually using it ourselves and getting that personal experience.
Great, thank you. Ina.
So I was going to say what Cece said, but fortunately I have a second thing, which is I think the point about we shouldn't be lobbying for the world that we wish is going to exist and preparing for the world that is going to exist. So what parts of our job, of our business more importantly than our job, is the AI going to be good at, and making sure that we're investing in the things as individuals, so trying it out and using it, but also as newsrooms, as news organizations, what can't the AI do, and investing more in that. Because I think the example I always give is if the newspaper industry had done that back in the day, instead of fighting for the bundle, which is what they did, the Washington Post would have put all of its resources in being a great local Washington paper and covering Congress well. The Napa Valley paper would be an expert in wine, and they would have a consumer service and a paid subscription. The LA Times would cover Hollywood really well. And I think in the same thing, I would encourage newsrooms, what are we really uniquely positioned to do? And what is the AI not coming for?
So I'm going to ladder this up because you started individual, newsroom, and I'm going to go to the world. Partly because I'm old, I'm going to retire, and you guys are going to be stuck with the world, and okay, not my problem. Which
Leave us,
is,
Dylan.
we have to get also, we do want to stay employed, we do want to pay our mortgages, we also have to get beyond ourselves, right? It's not about us as well. If we are stewards of public service information, if we believe everything we tell ourselves about the Fourth Estate, if we believe that we are here to help democracy function and to help people make better choices, then let's lean into that goal with or without us, whether we survive or we don't survive. Let's think about the people. Let's think about the communities that we say we serve. Let's think about the communities that we underserve. Let's think about how we can do those things better. And I think at the end of the day, okay, no mortgage, we're all poor living under the bridge, but we'd have done something good for the world. No, but seriously, we need to sort of step away also from how do we stay alive and how do we help the people that we say we want to help.
Fantastic, fantastic. Unfortunately, we have come to time, so I want to say a few thank yous. First, the Ford Foundation, sponsor of this panel. Thank you very much. Big shout out to Jen Christensen for bringing us together and to really making this happen. To you all for great questions and great conversation, and to our panelists, our three wonderful people for being here. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you.